Being a senior leader in online communities means a different set of responsibilities, concerns, and skill sets than just managing your everyday community role. We're going to talk about all of that today with my guest, Dani. Kalisa, let's roll the opening. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you happen to be. You've tuned in to talk about your community. I'm Todd Nilson with Clocktower Advisors, your host on this live stream that is all about a variety of perspectives in managing a community professional career, talking to people from a variety of different disciplines and perspectives about what it means to build and live in and run thriving communities, and especially in the online space, but offline, and my favorite, hybrids, all that is in between. Today's going to be one of my favorite past guests that we've had, Dani, who many of you know is a senior guy in our space. He's done a lot of great work over the years. We're going to just bring him on in a second to talk about our take on the world of the chief community officer or the head of community. If you've been following the YouTube channel for Clocktower, you may have seen that we did a series a short while ago, earlier this summer, around the role of the chief community officer or the head of community. I think this piece is going to go along with it, today's conversation, and I know Dani's going to have some wonderful highlights and insights for us as we get into that. Before I bring him on, just a quick mention, we've got another great guest. Max Pete is going to be coming on in 2 weeks on Friday at our usual time and channel here. And we're going to be talking a little bit about leveling your career from startups into enterprise kinds of roles. And so all of a piece, I've been doing a number of interviews, actually a couple of non-live stream recorded interviews with community professionals, talking and thinking about their careers and the role and sort of where we're going. I think mainly because it's been a bit of a tough job market, and over time for both consultants and for regular employees of organizations. I hear a lot of stories of individuals in the work that I do through the Community Consultants Collective, and just networking with others within our space. So it'd be great to get some of Dani's perspective on that. But look for the event notification on LinkedIn around the meeting with Max Pete a little bit earlier this month. It's going to be fabulous. We're going to have a great time. It'd be great to reconnect with him as well. He was another great guest on the show. So with that, I'm going to bring Dani on stage here. Dani, how have you been? How's life for you this summer?
I've been good. Good morning, Todd. Thanks again for having me on the show. It's been busy. So as some of you may or may not know, I wrapped up my tenure at SAP in mid-June, and life has just been quite busy. I've had a series of interviews with some exciting brands, and have come pretty close. Still in discussions with one, but regardless, I've also been busy with life and helping my mom get settled into an assisted living and taking vacation with my wife. But beyond that, I just actually got back from a week in Texas, and actually caught up with some of my community peeps, John Summers and Piper Wilson. We had a great lunch at Black's Barbecue in Austin. I had coffee yesterday with Christopher Detzel, and really kind of catching up with my peers.
I'm jealous of those. I'm jealous of those personal meetings, man. Especially, John and Piper. Love to catch up with them and see them. I don't know Chris as well, but definitely know the name, within our space. That's great. That's great. It's nice to be able to do those face-to-face meetings. I feel like a hermit up here in northeastern Wisconsin. I don't get out much. Like you, as you just shared, my mother's in assisted living, and so I don't really go traveling any more than I have to, just so that I can be nearby. I'm a little paranoid about that, but looking forward to one day maybe getting back out into the world and meeting people face to face again. So one of the reasons I wanted to bring you back into the show was, I think, because you are someone highly respected in the space. You've done a lot of work in senior roles in communities. I thought you would have a really good perspective on just the world of more senior level roles in community management. You've
Sure.
had a leadership role at SAP, and before that, with some of the rest of your earlier history, you maybe want to take a minute and catch
Sure.
those of us up to date who haven't been through your job history about a little bit of your journey to how you got to the things that you do today.
Absolutely. And so, like many other folks in the community space, the journey to become a community leader was not a beeline saying, "Oh, I want to be a community leader when I grow up." I had a long career at Hewlett Packard. I spent many of my last years there in HP's consumer support business, so really the B2C world. And in 2007, we created a brand new social care team with the charter of building out HP support forums. And so we actually partnered with Lithium back in the early days, and I got to learn from some of the smartest people in the space, Joe Cothrell, Brian Oblinger, and many others. And those last several years at HP, when we launched and scaled 7 language communities for support and had great success, that was kind of like my master's in community 101. And from there went on to 2 unicorns, Domo, Kaltura. Pre-IPO, went through the IPO with both companies, built out their B2B communities. The Domo, more extensively their Super Friend program, the user group program. And then more recently was a strategist over at SAP. And for the most part, the last year we spent kind of all hands on deck on managing probably the largest migration in community history. So I'm doing this quite a long time. I've kind of seen a lot of things in both the B2B and B2C world. I've been in the trenches, building from scratch to helping drive direction of where it needs to go, and really developing and delivering a better a better experience. And so I think to your point, whether you're starting out in the trenches and you're new to the game, or whether you're already a director, senior director, VP level, at the end of the day, one of the most important things that I think not everybody gets and is actually needed is understanding the value of the community relative to the business. You need to understand, who are you working for? What's the value proposition of the business? How is revenue being driven? How is profit being made in the company? Because at the end of the day, you've got to be able to tie, the value your community brings to your customers. If it brings value to your customers, ultimately it will drive value for the business. And so I love to talk about really 4 major pillars around value of community, but it's certainly not limited to these. But these are kind of the 4 big ones that many people understand. And so, traditionally, historically, a lot of the communities were support oriented. So it's I'm looking for an answer. I'm looking for a best practice discussion. And so they Google it, they go to the search the forums, they find an answer. And so instead of calling or emailing the brand support organization, they're actually finding the answer in the community. And so that drives support deflection. As great content gets created in the community, all of those accepted answers, well, those best practice discussions become golden nuggets. And so that can be converted to, knowledge-based articles for education, but also it becomes use cases for marketing. Really the big one where the big money is in advocacy and really those super fans. And that takes quite a long time to develop. And I think this is where many brands struggle in connecting not only the value, but also who are your power players in community. And again, when we talk about community, it's no longer the days of, just the, community at SAP.com, where you have a hub for people to engage. It's also all the conversations that your customers are having in the swim lane of their choice. And so it could be Twitter, it could be YouTube, it could be LinkedIn, LinkedIn, GitHub. And so having tools such as a common room and the like that are out there to track those conversations, not with the millions, but certainly with your top 5%ers, and understanding, okay, well, what accounts of mine do they represent? Are they even a customer of mine? But if, understanding these people are really passionate about my platform, my product, my brand, and, nurturing those folks. And then in addition to that, there's all the in-person and virtual meetups. So that's even more challenging to track. That really requires, deep engagement with your, customer success team. So at the end of the day, tying that all together to say, if we're able to harness the power and energy of these super fans and advocates, they then become influencers to drive upsell and retention, which is very common in the SaaS world. And then finally, the 4th one is really around innovation. If you've got this core, this community of passionate members that are highly engaged, highly knowledgeable about your platform or product, they then become an incubator for product development. And so again, understand having that knowledge, again, whether you're starting out or whether you've been around the block quite a long time, is extremely important, because then, especially when you get to the director level and higher, you need to be able to articulate and weave that into your conversations with, your direct manager or their peers, or certainly as you're trying to get buy-in for the value of the community. You need to understand your audience. So whether you're talking to the heads of support, the heads of marketing, the heads of engineering, you need to have relevant material that is going to resonate with them, because if you don't, you're not going to get their mind share. And it's not a one and done conversation. It takes quite a long time to get these people on board per se. And so again, it's really having a deep understanding of how does the community tie into the value of the business.
There's so much there that I want to delve into. So I think my first question is, I love the 4 pillars that you lay out there. I'm wondering, do you think of those in terms of these are 4 independent paths, or I was almost hearing a kind of a progression as you were talking about that, or almost a sort of a maturity of community model here, where we move just from that initial use case, as you said, which is very commonly support, to knowledge bases, to advocacy super fans, to actual innovation, product innovation, service innovation. With that, how do you generally think of that as you work with organizations?
So it really depends on where you are in your community journey and community building journey, number one. The second as well is the nature of the community. So again, who's your executive sponsor? So in my journey, I learned my early days were around HP support, where we were in this huge support organization. We had support in 20 plus languages, 25 languages across web, email, chat, and so forth. And so with that, that was the charter. But it could be that, you may have a DevRel community and they want innovation, or it could be that it's an advocacy community. So first of all, it has to start with, where do you reside in the community? Who is the sponsor? Because there could be an urgency or a value proposition that's most urgent. I think historically, setting the organization piece aside, the quickest wins, or the earliest value capture, typically happens in the deflection area and the content creation. Mm-hmm. The advocacy piece and building out that superfan program and harnessing those folks, that takes typically a lot longer. Now, it could be that you come into a much more mature community like an SAP, and that's already known. And so then it becomes a question of, well, are there operational things that need to be improved from an experience perspective, or, we already know who our mentors and champions are. Is there an opportunity to actually expand on this? So it really depends on where, the value capture opportunities may be equal across the board. Kind of goes back to, what's the most relevant right now for the business? Where are we going to drive value for our customers as well as for the organization?
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Dani Weinstein and talking about enterprise management, senior roles in community builders. Quick shout out to Francisco Apaza, who I see is out there in the chat audience. Great to see you, man. If there's anyone else out there that wants to say hello, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. If you've got any questions for Dani, or as we go into this discussion a little bit further. Dani, I wanted to ask a little bit about that direct manager, the reporting structure. When in HP or SAP, or even some of the startups you've worked for, have you found a difference between being directly reporting to someone at the C level of the organization, or have you found that there's no difference in effectiveness? Who you're working with. I'm not phrasing the question well, but I hope you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. So whether you're a direct report to a C level, which I had, Steve Wellen hired me at Delmo. He was the chief operating officer, or a director level manager in the early days of HP. I think at the end of the day, you need to be able to, either yourself or your manager, you need to be able to have that articulate that value. Why are we doing this, and why are we making the investment? So, again, the HP organization was massive. The business driver for creating those forums was the fact that we won a JD Power Award in North America in 2006 for best in class support. They did not renew it in 2007 because we were missing an HP branded forum. So there were forums like Tom's Hardware and others that were non-owned, where conversations were happening for support for desktop PCs and printers. There were these enterprise communities that HP IT had built back in the 90s that were homegrown, but their audience was the enterprise IT manager for storage, servers, and so forth. But they did have a handful of consumer discussion boards around desktop PCs and printers. So the charter was, okay, well, what's the value of a JD Power Award? And back in the day, we had tons of data on our traffic to web, on traffic to email, traffic to chat. And so we're doing modeling. Okay, if we can shift 1%, 2%, 5% of our traffic to community, you can clearly do the math on deflection. And several years down the road, we could prove tens of millions of dollars in savings. But I actually added on top of that, one element to the ROI model, which was, what's the value of the award? And at that time, HP was probably top 10 brands in the world. And I said, well, if this has a tenth of 1% of impact on the value of our brand, that's a lot of money. So we kind of threw that in the mix as well. So again, but regardless, you've got to have that conversation to channel that upwards to the C-level, because again, they're deciding on where the resources should go. In the early days of Domo, they already knew, they understood the value of creating, this community. They saw it across the board. So it was less of a harder sell. And even when I went to Kaltura, when I got introduced to them through my friend Gal Biran over at Base, and I spoke at his customer-led growth summit last week or 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to be in Boston on the 17th. When I got introduced to them, they actually wanted me to make a presentation to them, essentially, tell us about your community journey. Tell us the value proposition, like we're doing today, of community to the business. And what led from that, I thought I'd be hired as a consultant. My future manager, Donna Poleg, reached out and said, I want to meet you one-on-one, and said, you know what, I think you'd be amazing in our team. I don't have a job for you. We need to get you in front of my GM. And so in their case, they actually had, they were pre-IPO. They were growing like crazy because they own the video SaaS space in higher education as well as in corporate. And, think about learning in universities during the COVID era, everything's going online. So their business is exploding. They're going to go IPO the next year. And ironically, their customers had set up their own community on a listserv community at Oregon State. And so I, went in there and I'm like, this is crazy. I mean, this should be in your own backyard. And that was also a big driver for, teeing it up. And that's when I actually hired John and Piper, when they were part of Graziti, and as well as Chevetta, to be my community team. So they have it.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think that conveying the business value of the community to your manager, to the executive leadership team, so that they understand, what that value driver happens to be, is great. I know John just did something with his company. Is it C Data? They did a case study about deflection and just the money saved as a result of the community, through that, really establishing that ROI is good. And I know that's something that you mentioned Joe Cottrell a little bit earlier. I just talked to him a couple of weeks ago. He's doing great down in Chicago.
Oh, he's awesome. I miss him, man. I haven't seen Joe in person. So we had a Domo user group down in the Loop in Chicago, I think 5 years ago. And so he and I hooked up for tennis early morning. And then, we had breakfast at my hotel near Lincoln Park. And so it reminds me, I'm actually due to catch up with him. But no, I mean, I was just blessed to have him as a mentor in my early community days. And again, John Wishart and Brian Oling and many others went to this school of, Joe Cottrell's Community 101.
Exactly. Yeah, great guy. In fact, he was Joe was instrumental in connecting me with Richard. That was my first step outside of Seven Summits to being more independent. So always grateful to him for all he's done for so many of us in the community space over the years. Shout out, much love to him. So anyways, we're getting some nice chat. You've got some fans out in the ether here. In addition to Francisco, Danielle Beacon is out there. Also, I saw Eve Kadar as well. So, just a quick hello to everybody. I think Danielle had a question here, which is a good one. This is, I'm going to pop it on the screen here. How do you see community fitting into the life cycle marketing strategy for companies? And do you think companies are recognizing the value community can bring throughout the entire customer journey? I'm seeing many disconnected strategies, and this has been on my mind too, Dani. I'm reading. I don't know if you've seen this, Derek Weeks's book Unfair Mindshare. Where
no, I'll have to maybe pop a link to that. I'll put that in my list.
I will. He talks about sort of like the three orbits in a marketing organization. There's sort of the product orbit, there's the brand orbit, and then there's the community orbit. And he comes out of an orientation from the DevRel space, and really talks about sort of like these three need to be interconnected and regularly communicating with each other to be effective, for the organization overall. But there are some fundamental disconnects that can happen in the space, as Danielle mentions here. I don't know. Any stories from the trenches?
Yeah. So first of all, Daniel, thanks for coming by today. She was one of my peers at SAP, and part of the different organization. We collaborated on quite a number of different initiatives. So to Daniel's question, the first part of it is really fitting it, the community fitting into the lifecycle marketing strategy. And do we think companies recognize the value of community? I would say in many cases they're not. And I think part of the problem is it goes back to tying the data of your customers to the community. So understanding who's in the community. And Dome, we were very successful doing that. And again, it didn't happen at the beginning, but over time, integrating that to your CRM and understanding, who are my most active members in the community, and mapping that to what accounts do they represent. And so when that data is missing, it becomes harder to tie the value of the business, to the value of the community to the business. Again, if we go back to deflection, you've got models how to measure that. On the marketing side, I think it's incredibly important. There's really two elements. One is, understanding the accounts, and SAP's got tens of thousands of accounts, but understanding, okay, where are these people even in the community? Number one, are they even members? Are they even engaged? And again, when we talk about community now, as Richard Millington likes to talk about it, we're now in a community everywhere strategy. So it's the hub, it's the digital experience or channels that are relevant to the brand, and it's also the in-person meetup. So whether you're managing events and in person, whether you're managing, Sprinkler or other tools, Common Room to track conversations in LinkedIn, or whether it's your day-to-day ops, at the end of the day, you need to understand, okay, is my adoption across my business 5% of the community, 10%, it's understanding who's showing up at my events, who's engaging online, whether in the owned or non-owned channels, and where are they relative to my business? And so that's sort of the first piece, is what's the adoption. The second piece is then who's most engaged, and who are kind of those emerging super fans. So it's not just about browsing and consuming the content. It's also, are they having rich conversations about use cases? Is it conversations around how AI is going to, or how SAP is going to drive value in AI across the business, or how this is going to make my life easier as an IT manager using using Domo, whatever that may be, identifying those influencers, as I'd like to call them. And then with that, if you're able to capture that, then really be able to communicate that across the business and drive unity. And again, it could be a disparate large organization, like large marketing organization that may have multiple influencer programs, evangelist programs. It could be from various acquisitions. And at the end of the day, if you're under the same roof, honestly, there should be one, because you've got to find a set of resources. And so to your point, Danielle, I think the key is really, data is kind of the key here, number one. And then number two, it's really understanding, who's currently a major influencer, and then who are the emerging influencers, again, across these different channels. And with that, the key again is the ability to tie the value of the community back to the business.
Right. As I think about the difference between maybe a solo community manager in a small to mid-sized business versus a larger enterprise kind of business? When you get into larger enterprises, there's a lot more of management of expectations, and as we've been talking about, results both up and across the organization.
Uh-huh.
Who do you see as some of the key players, like, I guess drawing from your experiences at SAP and HP and elsewhere, who've been some of the key players for your success in sort of managing expectations up and out? Not asking you to name names, protect the innocent, of course, but in terms of roles or positions that you've found yourself partnering a lot with in any of your past roles.
Yeah, I mean, there've been quite a few in my particular journey, but again, I think it goes back to you've got to start with your immediate manager and your immediate management chain, because if you're trying to pitch it outside the organization and you don't have support in your own organization, then your success is going to be short-lived. Again, early days, Domo with Steve Wellen, he was chief operating officer, and he had pretty strong breadth across the org, CSM, support, education, community. And with that, it allowed me great access to to the key people to actually interview and understand and identify the value propositions, and then really partner up. But like anything else, once you move outside the org, there's a longer sell. And so even when we did ideation in the Domo community, it took about 9 months to get the VP of engineering on board. And even on the marketing side, it took time. In other roles, it kind of goes back to, again, if you've got and one of the things I've experienced is certainly change happens. And so as leadership changes in your organization, so does that mindset around the air cover for the work that's at hand. And so you've got to go back and revisit that and ensure that you've got that in play. And so we had that for quite a long time at HP. But then once our VP and SVP moved on out of the support org and went over to Apple, and new players came in, every 6 months we were questioning, well, why are we spending 7 figures on lithium? And so and this is also true. We went through multiple C-levels at Domo. We had pretty good success keeping that continuity. But then I had different story happen at Kaltura. So again, it goes back to alignment with your direct chain of management, especially if it's in a large organization, and leveraging that to get introductions and time with other executives across the org, where you can drive and identify, drive, and deliver value across the business. The more that you can drive that value across the business, the deeper the community is going to be entrenched, in the day-to-day, and that leads to the longevity of the operation.
In those roles at HP and SAP, you talk about sort of having face time with some of those different stakeholders within the organization. Were you working on site in an office when those roles, when you were fulfilling those roles, or were you more remote? Does it matter anymore? I'm curious if you find that some of the leadership teams have a bias towards the face-to-face as opposed to Zoom or Teams meetings or things like that.
That's a great question. So HP was kind of an early adopter of remote. So even when we created the social care team, my manager, Lois Townsend, has been a great mentor and friend over the years. She's actually in the area. But we didn't go to the office very much in those days back in Roseville. Our leadership team was down in the Bay Area. Certainly we'd have monthly or quarterly, in-person meetups, but we were already doing a lot on, this predates Zoom, probably WebEx and Citrix and so forth. But that was one. In the case of Domo, they were a Utah-based company. I was in California. I spent a lot of time in Utah in the first 6 months. So that certainly did require, in teeing up the community, a lot of in-person time. But after that, ultimately, I was back a year and a half later. I was almost fully remote. In the case of Kaltura, I didn't even meet anybody during the interview process. I was hired remotely, and I never met anybody except for one of the CSMs. I didn't meet my manager or the executive team until the IPO in New York, well over a year after I got hired. And even in the case of SAP, it was hired fully remotely, and it was occasional meetings down in the Bay Area. So to your question, no, it can be done remotely. Certainly, the relationship development is early on. can be a lot stronger if they have the opportunity to meet in person, but it's not necessarily required.
I think there's some great lessons in that. I mean, I think that there's still certainly strong value in when you first come into a new role, any new role, whether it's a leadership role or you're with a group. If you have that opportunity, if you have the option of being in person, for the first couple of weeks or months of that role, that can cement some relationships that pay you dividends a lot later. I think that's great. I think what you also said points to how the world of work has changed so significantly, and we've moved much more comfortably towards screens as opposed to sitting across a table from someone. And I think like a lot, for our work as community professionals, that this is how we interact. I'm not even super conscious of having this technology mediation between us for the conversation. It's just a conversation.
Right.
And just the tools have progressed to that state. So I'm wondering, I'd like to maybe change gears a little bit as far as sort of the work mix. Like we've talked about sort of managing expectations, keeping the stakeholders informed, talking about sort of what that cadence of conversation and reporting looks like, and communicating the value of all that. We haven't really talked about the teams that you manage. When you've come into enterprise organizations, you've either been charged to build a team, like with some of the unicorns you've worked with, Clocktower, or I forget, Domo. Or you're inheriting a team that's already there, and you've got to refigure, like, okay, is everybody in the right spot? Is this structured right? Like putting on your manager's hat. What do you think about as you're trying to structure the right community team for use cases of the organization? Because that seems to be such a key to the success of it, and particularly like as you become more senior, how much time are you really spending yourself in the community, looking at what's going on day to day in that space?
So great question. So again, the HP team back in the day was the original 3 on the social care team. And, my initial focus was, the launches of those 7 language communities. And I was basically became a power admin. And ultimately the team grew to about 35 people under Lois's leadership across multi-region, and so on. Now, and again, my day-to-day, I was really deep into the day-to-day interactions in the community. I was the power admin. We had amazing, moderators from Lithium who, today have launched their own incredible, careers. And there's too many to list that I could, call out here. But, when going into Domo, and to your early point, those first 6 months, again, I was in Domo every week in person. So they were in a 400-person company, and a couple of small buildings in a tech park in American Fork. And so that FaceTime was actually invaluable because, again, I had to spend a lot of time with the COO on educating on the value community, understanding where we were at. They already had an agreement with Lithium, realizing we had a deadline to tee the community up. And so I pitched him, and he wrote a 6-figure check to get actually a better experience from Lithium, but also a virtual team to support me in launching it on time and helping it go up and running. So with that, my approach has always been, especially in early days when you're teeing things up, you want to be as lean as you can. You first need to drive the value of the community and the business. And once you're doing that, and you're, it's being embraced across the organization, then you're going to get resources to actually get more dedicated headcount to report to you. So again, sort of virtual team with through Lithium in the early days to get things up and running. And then over time, I could hire a web developer, and I had several interns that helped drive the programs we were doing, whether it be in the day-to-day operation or the software development or the some of the user group programs that we were dealing with. In the case of Clocktower, again, trying to tee things up fairly quickly. When I came in, I had reviews all the way up to the executive, all the way to the CEO on my budget. We had data showing why they needed the community. I knew I had a number in my mind that I wanted to get to. I asked for a higher number. I got 90% of my ask. And so, again, it was kind of, one of the keys was getting this thing off and running fairly quickly. And so we got approved. I was able to, get Vanilla on board. I worked with Graziti. We teed up the community fairly quickly, and we brought in John Piper and Shavetta as my my virtual team. So again, it goes back to, as you're building out your operation and you're showing value, and it's now being people are at ease with, all right, I get that now. I'm seeing the data, I'm seeing the time to the business. You're then going to get approval to get headcount, from dedicated community manager, dedicated developer, dedicated person to run the superfan program, whatever that may be, or even money to work for a consultant, whether Erica, Rich, or Brian. It's kind of all of the above. As far as the day to day, it really depends on where you're at. If it's the early days, you're rolling up your sleeves, you're really doing everything.
It's all hands on deck, right?
And,
yeah.
You're in startup mode, and so again, in the case of SAP, it was really, I was doing community around for quite a long time. I spent quite a number of months looking at strategy, working with fellow strategists within SAP, understanding the operation of the community. But then we got pulled into probably the largest migration in community history. So it was really all hands on deck, and doing things I had done before, but again, it was needed, and we needed to get that done. So again, it is an evolution, and at the end of the day, you've got to make a decision. All right, where am I going to put my energy, to drive? It goes back to how are you being measured for success? What are those agreed upon KPIs? It goes back to that leadership conversation. Okay, well, what are the KPIs of community? Is it how much deflection we're going to drive this month? How many new members are we going to get? How much traffic are we going to drive? How many super fans are we going to create? All of the above. You need agreement on what that looks like and how long it's going to take. And then as you're delivering success, you can then ask for more.
I love that. Did you? I wanted to ask also, in the organizations you were in, did you have like a budget autonomy, for as far as the spend goes, or was that a more of a collaborative interaction with the with your direct manager in HP or SAP?
So in most of my roles, it was collaborative, or it was above my pay grade at that point. But certainly in the case of Kaltura, I did.
Mm-hmm.
We had to go up to the CEO to ask, to get approval for that, and then it was sort of like, okay, here's your budget and go run with it. And so I made really decisions. Okay, I want to do this with I want to spend X on Grazidi, I want to spend X on vanilla, and I want to do this, and that, and we're off and running.
So you were certainly helping to build those budgets and sort of make recommendations as far as the spends go.
And then certainly even on the planning phase, part of extended teams to understand what we're going to need for the following years at HP, and certainly the case at Doma, they had when it was interesting when I came into Doma, there's already a relationship at the executive level between Domo and Lithium. So when I came in, they already had an instance of Lithium that they were licensing.
And for those kids of you out there who are wondering what the heck Lithium was, that's modern day Koros. Is that right?
Sorry, I'm aging myself, but yes, it's today Koros. But effectively, I hadn't seen the black and white dev box of Koros Lithium since probably 2007. When I came into Doma, I'm like, what is that?
Wow.
And so so that piece was sort of one element that we didn't have to figure out. That was already a done deal. And because of the mutual relationship, they both were each other's customers. Getting that renewal was less of an issue. The bigger point was more about, what does the mix look like from bells and whistles? How much horsepower are we going to need from PHP perspective? Because that was one of the drivers of cost. But more importantly, we were time boxed because my first day on the job, they had decided upon Domo's first customer conference, Domopalooza, and they said you need to be live at Domopalooza. So I literally had 90 days. So 1 month was like sitting with Steve on educating that community, having him write, then month 2 was really socializing across the organization and having him write me at the end of the first month, having him write me a 6-figure check, getting, Lithium Chorus onboarded into planning out, what is the experience going to look like? And then even to the point earlier about, the cross-organization buy-in, marketing was like, well, who is this guy? We're busy trying to build up the, the customer conference. I said, this is incredibly important. I need a space. And I actually had Joe Cothrell come to the opening. He did the welcome. We basically had a welcome to the community training, at the hotel where the conference was being held. And we literally dragged 40 people in from the hallway to attend my session. Joe did the kickoff on, why is community value for the business, and we literally trained those members in our dev environment, which is kind of taboo, real time, and then we flip the switches and turn the community on at the conference. So,
but I hope you didn't find the budget responsibility question invasive. Like I'm trying to get a take on this, and I've never been in that level corporate role, nor do I hope I'm ever in that. That's not my bag. But
I think the short answer is simply this: in some cases, I have owned it completely, but in many cases, it's rolling up. So 1 or 2 levels, and you've got to have all your ducks in a row and understand what your needs are and the value you're going to bring, and be part of those conversations to advocate for the success of your operation or your programs, and understand that you may not get everything, and you need to have a plan B in your back pocket that says, I may only get 80% or 70%. What does that look like? What do we, what can we afford? What are the must-haves? What are the nice to haves? And what's sort of like a red line in the sand? Because if they come back and say, we don't have that budget, then there's risk.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. Get a question from one of our audience members here. I can't see it. Just says LinkedIn user at the moment. I'd have to go over to LinkedIn to see who that is. But best ways to prove community ROI, even with all the spammers, etc.
Okay, well, I'm not exactly sure what the spammer element refers to, but again, I think early on, and if you weren't able to join early on, I think there's kind of 4 major pillars of value. And again, it's not limited to that. I think there's even more use cases that are out there, but sort of the big ones that span much of I would say both smaller and larger organizations. There's various modeling that's out there. So again, you've got, if you already have a way to measure support deflection, or you're managing the cost of your every support interaction in your company, whether that be through a chatbot, through email, through phone, and web, then understanding, okay, if you have a support-oriented community, first and foremost, what's the percentage? How many questions are being asked in the community? How many are actually successfully being solved? What's the solve rate? What's the answer rate in the community? That's sort of number one. The second is, if you're surveying customers coming into the community, one classic question is, did you find the answer you were looking for today? And if the answer is yes, then the following question would be, would you have called support, or do you intend to call support? So you can build out a modeling that says this is actually capturing deflection. You then look at your overall traffic numbers of unique visitors, and maybe there's a way to filter out the spammers if that's out there. And then map that to the cost by channel that they were going to reach out to you on. So that's sort of one area. The second's around all those questions that are now solved or accepted answers. Microsoft back in the day had a model around every view of an accepted solution was worth 25 cents, 50 cents, $1. I know Salesforce does that as well. So there's a way to model that. It's a little more complex. Beyond that, the advocacy piece is a bit more challenging, but it can be done. I mean, at Domo, we were a data company. We had great data. We had a modeling on, account health scorecards, and we could show, diving deep into the data. Okay, of the accounts that had active members in community compared to accounts that had no active members in community. Those accounts were typically healthier and less at risk of churn than accounts that had nobody in community. The same is true for education, but that's kind of a 35,000 foot level. The next layer of that is actually diving deeper and really understanding, okay, of my, 100 trailblazers that have golden hoodies. Okay, you can actually track their daily interactions and who are they engaging with and who are they influencing. Then you could start doing and maybe AI gets us there, but that would be sort of the blue sky. And I haven't really seen an account or a company actually do this yet. And then lastly is around innovation. So if I'm the VP of engineering and I'm chasing 1,000 different emails on the same idea from feedback that's coming from my CSMs, from meetings with the CEO, or coming in through support email, how much energy is being put on that versus having one thread in the community on the same idea and showing all the votes? But beyond that, it's not just the voting, which can be gamified or gamed by an account. Look under the hood and saying, well, who's actually voting? What accounts do they represent? Am I going to give weight to an idea who's a one-stop shop who went to college with the CEO, or am I going to give weight to my top 10 account that's actually going to spend, it means if I do this, if I'm the VP of engineering and I invest in this idea, it means X business. That becomes a lot more relevant for the VP of engineering because they have to make a choice. I can't do every idea that customers have. I can do a few. And so the biggest driver is going to be, well, what does it mean as far as the adoption of your product and retention of the customer? And so having that data, again, connected to the ideation, it drives efficiencies for the engineering team on chasing the same idea, but also it gives great data to the VP of engineering to say, oh, I've got 100 votes on this idea, but it also represents, X dollars of revenue for my business. That's a much more powerful thing, and that becomes a big ROI driver.
That question was from Eve. Thanks for that. And Dani, thanks for unpacking that answer a little bit more too. That was super helpful. In the time we have left, because we're 45 minutes in already, hard to believe. I wanted to bring up something timely. I mentioned this to you before we got on the call today to start. Richard Millington did a post. It looks like yesterday, kind of stating that he says, I don't have any data on this, but judging by my inbox and LinkedIn, senior community pros seem to be finding it much more difficult to find new roles than those at the junior level. And then he kind of concludes like, this could be maybe one of two things. He speculates many of the top tier community roles aren't coming back anytime soon is one of his hypotheses. And the second is many of these folks may find roles in other places in the enterprise, like product, marketing, support, something like that. I'm wondering, like, because you're in the search right now and have been looking, how are you finding the market right now for more senior roles? Like, what's your take on it? And are the roles that you're finding, are you finding that they're good faith opportunities from organizations?
Sure. So, in my particular case, I mean, I've been through this rodeo before, and fortunately, I'm extremely well connected in my space. And so when this all happened, my initial action is not to just go out on LinkedIn and apply to every job that's out there. It's really to, reach out to my network and my peers, such as Richard and Eric and Brian and others. But even, the vendors are in the know as well. So I know Joel Kremick has done a great job of keeping me in the loop on some great opportunities, and I appreciate all of them for that. But even this other organization, which actually I know Eve from, they start out as Career Leap. It's called Leap Academy, and it's an executive search organization I've been a part of for several years. We kind of call it the hidden market. So it's not just limited to the community world. This is true, I think, across, there's a lot of, the layoffs in tech in particular have been brutal. I think it's in vogue now. Salesforce, Dell, SAP, even Apple's laying off people. So, and even now we're seeing with the jobs report that came out this morning with, the Fed's, toying how much they want to cut rates. So with all that, I think that at the end of the day, it's about budgets being cut, and it's, they get bigger bang for the buck when they do tops down layoffs. And so from what I'm seeing specifically, I think the very senior roles are certainly very few and lean in between. And, they are definitely out there. I think there's certainly fewer than there were several years back. And I think that, some people are taking a step down as far as, jumping into another role that's, not at that level. But again, I think everybody's got to make a personal choice about what they want to, how do they want to spend their time? Where do they want to bring value? In my particular case, I've been through the journey before. I know it's going to take time. It's about really getting my, personal roadshow going. That's, one of the reasons why I'm on your show today. And also, I just came back from a week in Texas after bringing my son to school and catching up with, a lot of community peeps out there, which was great, but also some others. And it's, planting seeds and really having those, grow over time. And so I think right now the market is very tough. Regardless whether you're going for a senior role or a junior role, at the end of the day, having somebody who is inside the brand, inside the account, is always 10x better.
Huge.
The job boards are kind of a waste of time, in my opinion. I mean, they're good to maybe identify, but you've got to have somebody can get your introduction to the hiring manager, who's in the know, who can get your resume, kind of bypass the bots, bypass the filters that are already out there, because a lot of people are just getting automatically turned away. So in my case, again, I won't call it the brands, but I've had several very interesting conversations in the last couple months with some great brands. I've gone incredibly deep with one in particular that I'm still in discussions with. And so, I'm confident things will work out fine over time, but you got to have a lot of patience in the space.
I appreciate that answer. That's great. And like you had said, you've been through this search process, the journey before. Are you finding any like differences in how these organizations are choosing to run interviews, or like are the processes different? Is it tougher? Like, are they asking for more stuff from you as part of this? I'm kind of curious. I don't really have a bunch of data points around it, but
That's a
it
great.
feels. Yeah.
So I've seen a lot. I mean, again, I've interviewed over the years with everybody from AWS and Google, which are probably the most regimented. And so right now, I mean, the most recent one, I had 10 interviews in 2 months. Again, very deep in the process. Did not have to do any kind of presentations. The previous brand had fewer interviews, but the final one was a panel discussion around a presentation that I had to give. So again, it's kind of a mix. In many cases, you're starting with a recruiter, although there was one brand most recently that I started the conversation with, and actually I thought it was interesting that the very first conversation was with the hiring manager.
Oh,
so it sort of begs the question, well, what's the value of the recruiter? Because in my mind, that should be if you're valuing the time of the hiring manager, then you would think that the recruiter should be confident enough in a recruiter to be able to manage the filtering on, okay, this is a viable candidate or not. So, and again, and trading notes with my peers, it really varies. I think you're going to see everything from, extensive interviewing across, the team to the executive level, to depending on the level of the role, to, doing a, 90-day go-to-market presentation on what you're going to do your first 90 days.
I guess in my mind, the question, that I've been turning around is, as a result of some of these tightened budgets, are we seeing sort of more rounds of interviews? Are they asking for more things that are of the character of, hey, build this presentation for us or create a strategy for us? Things that I would say, wait a minute, you can hire me for that as a consultant rather than,
so
like there's some bad behaviors that I've heard about from certain quarters that I think need to be called out.
I agree. So I would say to that, in my, not recently, but in certainly previous sabbaticals, as I like to call them, I've had to do multiple presentations. I was actually paid for each of them. So that I think also sets a tone of sort of how serious they are about it. I do agree, though, that they are getting kind of free consulting. And so it kind of begs the question, I think you have to ask yourself, when they give you the framework of what they want in the presentation, you need to ask, okay, are they really serious about me as a candidate? Is this something that really should be done once I'm hired? Do they need this to make a decision on hiring me or not? And I think you have to have confidence in yourself, like, okay, how badly do I need this role? It also reflects on the culture of the company you're coming into. So at the end of the day, we're all adults in the room, and you've got to be able to make a decision about how you want to spend your time and energy. And is this somebody, okay, if I go ahead and do this, maybe is this going to give me an example of what the day-to-day is like? Or does it really prove, because again, you're interviewing them as well. And so
absolutely 100%.
You need to ask yourself, working, full-time work it's a good chunk of your life. And so, you have to ask yourself, am I going to be happy here? Is this a culture that I'm going to be excited about? Is this somebody I'm going to enjoy working with and for? So again, I'm seeing all of it, and yes, there are, like anything else, there are bad behaviors that are out there, and I think there's also good behaviors. I mean, in fact, the recruiter that I just worked with at the last brand where the door was still open, she was fantastic. I mean, every time I had an interaction, immediately follow up, told me about next steps. In the end, even though I didn't get the offer, I was runner up. They called me and said, we would hire you in a heartbeat if you had another role. And I've been on the opposite end of the spectrum where I've been ghosted. I've even got an email where I said, we didn't choose you, but happy to get on a call for feedback. I said, sure, let's get on a call, and radio silence. So I've kind of seen a lot in the space.
Yeah. Well, Donnie, this has been incredibly insightful and helpful, I think, to many people on their own career journeys as they're thinking about what their next roles are going to be, as they're thinking about growing into more senior level enterprise roles. I think your willingness to share those experiences, I think, is going to help a lot of people. Thank you so much for being on the show today. It's great. Was there anything you wanted to leave people with as sort of a parting thought on the topics we've covered today?
Yeah, a couple things. So first of all, feel free to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. Number one. Number two, I know you guys post I shared in the private chat. I wrote an article several years back. I think it's still very relevant about the job searching journey. You got to have a lot of patience in this space, but there's still a lot of great tidbits in there. So have a look at the Medium article that I wrote. Todd, thanks again for having me on the show. I look forward to the next opportunity. And then lastly, let me grab the link for those people who are in Boston and would like to get a free ticket to my speaking. I'm going to be talking about scaling global communities at the Obsession Customer-Led Growth Summit. Excuse me, in Boston. Oh, sorry, I'm going to get the link here. I'm going to put that in the chat window. Then hit me up, and I actually have some time in Boston as well. And then I'm also going to be probably going to hang out outside of Dreamforce probably for a day on September 19th. So if you're in the Bay Area and you want to connect with me, hit me up.
That's fantastic. Yeah, we'll get that up in the chat. I think we get your blog article is up there as well. Look forward to hearing about some good news for you, in your next landing. And in the meantime, I, of course, wish you well, and glad to keep the conversations going. For those of you out there, thank you for tuning in. If you stuck with us through the whole show, which it looks like many of you did, we're grateful for that. If you are so inclined, we'd love to get some additional conversation and comments going either in LinkedIn or over on the Clocktower YouTube channel, where I would humbly ask if you think this interview is great. We've got a lot of others out there. I would humbly ask that you would subscribe or comment out there as well. Every little bit helps. In the meantime, be good to yourself. Take some time off this weekend. Get away from the screens. Get out into nature. Take a deep breath of fresh air. And we'll be back here in 2 weeks with Max Pete. It'll be a terrific time. Have a good weekend, everybody. Kalisa, let's roll the credits. See you, Donnie.
Thanks, everybody.